Today I am going to do the books that I read in January this year. I didn't think I was going to read anywhere near as many as I did, but I did manage to get through 9 books in January. So I will start off with my first one. That was Simon Mayo, TikTok. This was the book that was included in the book club that my daughters have made for me, and that was a really good sort of bog standard read. It was a bit ripping, a bit of an excitement. Yeah, just a very good start off. What I would say is if you want to see the bigger review about that, see the video I did on the book club and opening my February one as well, and that gives a bit more of a review. The second book I read in January was called Personal Days, and this was one that was another book club book, not for my daughters but the other book club, and I read that on the Kindle, and I would say this was absolutely awful. I really disliked it. It was set in an office and it was full of people and following their kind of life in the office, and it was working for a company that was laying a lot of people off and making a lot of people redundant, and it was kind of the story of what happened to them all. But all of the characters were so dull, they were so boring, they just had no interest, and their only role in life was to be an employee of this company. So I got to 62% of the book and just gave up. I am not reading any more of that. So yeah, Personal Days by Ed somebody, no, not at all. It was rubbish. The next book I read was The Last Storm, and by Tim LeBon, and this was the book out of the End of the World book club that I'm also a member of, which is the subscription box. If you want to see more about that, again, I have posted a video very much about that one. This was a good book. It was very different to most apocalyptic books, and yeah, I did really enjoy it. It went at a pace. It was very good. The next book I read was Life Through Poetry by Norma Watson. This is a strange one because I don't normally read poetry, but Norma lives 2 seconds walk up that way. And I went to school with her daughter, and I went to college with one of her other daughters, so that I knew the family very well. So I purchased it because of who had written it. And I have to say, I loved her poetry. It was really good. And there was one line in it. I know at some point in her life, she actually had custody of her granddaughter, Laken. And as people who know me will know that I used to live with my grandchildren and my daughter and her partner, and they have recently moved out. And there was these few lines in this book that just summed it up. This was when Laken went back to live with her mum, and it just really did sum up how I feel at the moment, getting used to living without my grandchildren. Time, which was once limited, now seems endless. All the things I wanted to do, if only I had time, seem shallow. The interrupted TV programmes, which are now uninterrupted, are dull and boring. The once noisy house is deathly quiet. The tables remain polished. So that was just really summed up how I'm feeling at the moment, getting used to living without my grandchildren. So all I can say about that is thanks to Norma for putting it very clearly into words for me. The next book I read was a bit of a behemoth. This is a massive book, The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a fantasy book, and it is high fantasy. It's got magic, it's got dragons. I don't think it's got elves or anything else in it, but it is high fantasy. It was fantastic. I would say it was described on the back as kind of like a feminist Lord of the Rings, and I get why you would say that. I think if you think about Lord of the Rings being written by a 62-year-old man back in the 50s, white British male, this is written by a white British female in 2019, and as such it is a much more updated version, but it has the same kind of story, a great big ensemble of characters in a whole world that's been created for this, and with an epic quest as well. The other difference was that in Lord of the Rings they start off as the Fellowship and then they split up and have their adventures. In this one they're all disparate all over and they come together in the end. But yeah, spectacular book. It was a long read, I won't deny. I can't think how many pages it had. 800 odd. So not a short read, but I actually tore through it very quickly because it really was easy to read and absolutely fantastic. Some of the imagery was brilliant. The character development was brilliant. Yeah, a really, really good book. Next book I read, Colm Ickledon, Wolf of the Plains. Now, Colm Ickledon is an author that I've read other books of and I've really enjoyed them. This was the story of Genghis Khan. And this book is the first in a series of 5. I didn't realise that when I started to read it, but it is the first in a sort of not trilogy, a 5-book series. And this one covers his childhood up until he starts to unite the tribes in the plains to actually go across it. It was a very easy read. You went through it very quickly. I was halfway through it thinking, oh my gosh, I need to buy the other 5 books, the other 4 books in the series. I need to read all these. And then, then it became a little bit of a saga of one battle after another. And it was how many times do you want to hear about how he cut someone's head off? It's not really, it started to get a little bit repetitive. So I don't know if I'm going to read the others. My current feeling is I'm going to put it on a shelf and think about it. And if it keeps jumping back into my head, if I keep thinking about it, then I'll buy the next one and see how I feel. But at the moment, I'm quite happy just to have read this one, and that's the entirety of it. Colm Ickledon, he writes, it's fast moving, it's well paced. It's not a deep thinking book. It doesn't make you think about the world. It's just a rip-roaring story. So as such, it was enjoyable. But I'm not sure I would read any more of them. We'll have to wait and see. Next one. Bit of a random one, this one. Geddington as It Was, The Social History of a Rural Community by Monica Raine. I read this for my grandchildren. They live in Geddington, a small village in Northamptonshire, a little distance from where I live, but not too far. And it's a village with a huge history. It was the place of a royal hunting lodge when they had the forest, and King William the Conqueror stayed there, and King John and Edward II and everything. And it has got one of the Eleanor crosses from Edward I when his wife died. So it's a village with a lot of history, and I read this so that we can do a Geddington history project with the grandchildren. They are home educated, so we look for things. And in the summer, once we're going to start walking around the village a lot more, and it's a lot nicer to be outside, we will do it. So I did read almost cover to cover Geddington as It Was, and it was it a good read? I'm not sure, but it's a book that you would, if you want to know about Geddington, you would read it. It isn't a difficult, challenging book to read. I just think it's got a very narrow sort of group of people who would actually want to read it. But yeah, not bad. Not bad for what it was. The next book I read was The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. And this was about set in Victorian times. When Cora Seaborn's husband dies, she steps into her new life as a widow with as much relief as sadness. Retreating to the countryside with her son, she encounters rumours of the Essex Serpent, a creature of folklore said to have returned to roam the marshes. This is, as I say, it says, set in the Victorian times. It was a very character-driven book. There wasn't a lot of sort of like story to it. It was very much a slow burner. So if you like those sort of things, as I do, it was a very interesting book. There was all sorts. It's a book very much about relationships and all the different relationships. So there was a lot of love in it, but it wasn't all romantic love. It was love between friends. It was love of history, of a hobby. It was love between a mother and a child. There was all those sort of different forms of love, not just romantic love, and that made it quite interesting. All the characters in it were very interesting as well. They all had something more about them. They didn't just talk about family and what was going on. They all had a hobby, archaeology or medicine or something. So they were having really good conversations with each other. So yeah, I thought it was a very, very good book. The Essex Serpent itself was a bit of just the thing that brought them all together. But it was a very good book, bit of a slow burner, not really the thing if you're into a very fast-paced book. But yeah, as it was, I thought it was a great book. The next book I read was The Return of the Light, which is a collection of stories from around the world for the winter solstice. Whatever your religious views are, back in the day, most communities were very conscious that the sun sort of stopped at a certain point for a few days in the middle, and then it started to come back and back and back and back more. And there were a lot of stories about the disappearance of the sun and whether the sun would come back. So it's really interesting. There's a collection of stories from all over the world. There were a couple that stood out to me. One was from Africa, and one was from China. So it just shows that right across the world there were stories about the sun and the longest night and the midwinter solstice. So yeah, it was quite interesting book. As always with these, some appealed to me more than others, but on the whole, yeah, it was a very interesting book, and I will certainly read some of these stories to my grandchildren. And then the final book is The Rewilders by Lindsay Littleson. This is a children's book. I haven't quite finished it, but I will be finishing it within the next couple of days. I was very clear when I started doing this channel that I'm not going to bulk out the number of books I read by reading children's books or young adults books, which a lot of booktube people do. But this is a children's book, but I am actually reading it out loud to my grandchildren. So I haven't picked it to bulk my numbers up. It's just a book that I'm reading to them. So I will have actually read it out loud to them. It's a lovely little book. It's about two children who are trying to rewild a mountain lynx, and the story of how they go about it. My granddaughter's enjoying it enormously as well. Nearly finished it. It's a book, you know, if I was to sit and read it myself, I'd probably read it in an evening, if not just a couple of hours. But reading it out loud, it takes a lot longer. But yeah, that's a very nice book. So that's 10 books I've actually read in January. I was kind of hoping that I was going to get to 100 for the year, but not rigidly. As I say, I'm not going to read short, snappy, easy books to read just to make up the numbers, but I would like to get somewhere towards 100. And at the minute, if I'm standing at 10 for first month, I'm going to make it. So yeah, so that was the 10 books I read in January, and we'll see what I read in February. Okay, bye.